Normally for chuck roasts, I like to smoke them, braise them in a pan, and once they're nice and tender, pull for some amazing smoked pulled beef. But today, I'll be treating this chuck roast like a brisket. I'll be smoking it, wrapping it, and once it's nice and tender, I'll be slicing it. Let's get started.
Here's this chuck roast that I vacuum sealed a couple months ago. Let's remove from the package and pat dry. As you can tell, it's a little bit on the chunkier side. One thing to note is look at that marbling. This is gonna cook really, really well, I can already tell.
Now it's time to season this chuck roast. I won't be using my normal salt pepper like I do my briskets. I'm gonna be using this brisket rub made by Blood So's Barbecue.
The ingredients are pretty standard for a brisket rub. Some salt, pepper, garlic, and onion. But right away I notice how chunky it is. I love these types of rubs. Nice and chunky. It reminded me a lot of Montreal steak seasoning. Be sure to coat generously and make sure you cover all sides. For today's cook, I'm going to be using the slow N Sear. First we'll set up a few charcoals. I'm going to be lighting about 12 briquettes with a Weber lighter cube. Stack them up. Drop in some apple wood chunks. I'll be placing a quart of hot water into the water reservoir. This does two important things. It keeps the moisture up in the kettle and it helps regulate temperatures. And it also serves as a heat barrier. The water reservoir is what makes the slow N Sear really good for low and slow cooks.
To fill up the reservoir to capacity, you will need a quart of hot water. When running low and slow, the water will last about 6 to 8 hours. This should be plenty for most cooks. But if you need water, it's easy enough to refill. Just be sure to use boiling water or near boiling water so temperatures continue to be locked in when you refill.
I'm going to be using the Easy Spin grate, and I'm going to be removing the portion that's on top of the slow N Sear. I like to get it out of the way. And for longer cooks, I like to fill it with additional charcoal. Let's cover and let it come up to temperature. Besides waiting for it to come up to temperature, we also gotta let the smoke clear a little bit. When it's bellowing white smoke like this, do not put your meat in there. You gotta wait a couple of minutes until it's nice and clear. What you're looking for is that thin blue smoke that everybody talks about. Once the smoke is clear and their temperatures are good, it's time to put in our chuck roast. I'll be rotating the lid. This way the heat goes around the lid and out the vent. About 3 hours later, it's time for me to start spritzing, especially around the dry areas. So you can tell the bark is developing nicely. The rub is really good. So far I'm impressed. Let's cover up. Once covered, you'll want to spritz about every hour or so. We're now at the 6-hour mark, and let's check our charcoal. As you can tell, the charcoal consumption is really good, and there's still water in the water reservoir.
This turned out great. I'm very happy how this cook turned out. If you never tried smoking a chuck roast, then head over to the store and get yourself one. They're cheap, they're easy, and most of the time if you get yourself a small one, it will cook pretty quickly. This one, however, was a pretty good sized one, so it took a while. About 9 hours to get to an internal temperature of 200 degrees, but it was well worth it.
It's developed a really great bark, and it's time to wrap. I'm going to stir up the charcoal a little bit, but I'm really impressed with the charcoal consumption so far on the slow N Sear. I'm going to put the chuck roast back on the grill and put in my temperature probe to start monitoring internal temperatures. And now it's time to wait for the chuck roast to reach an internal temperature of 200 degrees.
If you're going to try this, be sure that your chuck roast is on the chunkier side and not those thin chuck roast steaks we usually see at grocery stores. For those smaller cuts, the braising in a pan method is still your best bet. So after 9 hours of cooking time and 2-hour rest time, it's time to unwrap. When dealing with a thicker piece of meat, you have to take into account the cooking time. I missed it by a lot, which is why we didn't end up enjoying it until the next day when we made these awesome sandwiches. But now back to our chuck roast. Bark looks great, so let's slice. Got some of it, but this is really great bark. That's the best part. Bark is perfect. This is really juicy. This is good. Wow, look, it's falling apart, but I could easily pull it. But these slices they're next level. I mean, it's just salt, pepper, garlic, onion. That's all it is in that rub, but just something special about it. I think the marbling on the chuck roast is what made this really, really juicy and delicious. Wrapping it like a brisket, treating it like a brisket, definitely works. I might be cooking my chuck roast like a brisket moving forward, but don't take my word for it. If you want to do your own comparisons, but you need an in-depth explanation of the braising technique method for chuck roast, then be sure to check out my next video. Plus, I'll show you how to make some awesome smoked pulled beef enchiladas that I'm sure you will love.